Gender bias in informants and boots on the ground in Buffalo, NY. Naming, shaming, and costs to high-risk victims. Introduction. Gendered slurs and shorthand labels such as Sinaloa members, prostitutes, blowjob queens, sugar mama, Uber, sex slave, Ubereats, crazy, and others have circulated in Buffalo over the past 6 years. When those words come from informants, patrol officers, prosecutors, or community boots on the ground, they do more than insult. They reshape investigations, block services, and increase danger for high-risk victims and domestic violence survivors. Local context and why language matters in Buffalo. Buffalo and Erie County operate within New York's legal and victim service systems that aim to identify and protect survivors. Survivors' real access to protection, however, is shaped as much by interpersonal language and local rumor economies as by policy. Gendered, sexualized, or dehumanizing labels become informal records that follow people into interviews, reports, courtrooms, shelters, and community spaces, changing how risk is perceived and acted upon, how naming and shaming function, and the harms they cause. These labels reduce complex lived experience to moral or sexual shorthand, shifting focus from safety and coercion to judgment. They prime disbelief and stigma, making victims less likely to be believed or supported. They create reputational harm that persists beyond a single incident and deters help-seeking. Survivors may avoid calling police or services to escape humiliation or blame, and biased investigations shaped by gendered framing can lead to underestimation of lethality and coercive control. Stigmatizing narratives make it harder to secure protective orders, housing, and prosecution that center safety. Repeated name-calling increases shame, isolation, and mental health burdens, diminishing survivors' resilience and access to supports. Where gender bias appears, informants, boots on the ground, and community spread. Informant networks often favor quick shorthand and reputational tags. When those tags are sexualized, they obscure nuance and introduce gendered bias into official records. Rumors that label someone as a prostitute or assign trafficking tropes can mask whether a person is being coerced, exploited, or participating voluntarily. Patrol officers, intake staff, and prosecutors make rapid triage choices that are vulnerable to heuristics, and derogatory descriptors can become informal criteria for who is treated as a credible victim. Reports that reproduce slurs influence charging decisions, threat assessments, and referrals to services. Nicknames and slurs spread beyond private gossip into social media, neighborhood chatter, and sometimes even press reports, hardening stigma into a form of social evidence. High-risk response in Erie County and the role of Be Safe. Erie County convenes multidisciplinary high-risk teams that include domestic violence agencies, law enforcement, the district attorney's office, probation, child protective services, and social services to identify cases most likely to escalate to serious injury or homicide. These teams aim to pool information, assess lethality objectively, and coordinate safety-first interventions. Be Safe provides trauma-informed advocacy within the Erie County District Attorney's Office and courts, supporting survivors regardless of whether a criminal case proceeds. Be Safe advocates help survivors navigate legal processes, access services, and ensure safety planning is survivor-centered. High-risk teams and embedded advocacy programs like Be Safe are uniquely positioned to detect when rumor-based, gendered language is skewing assessments. By screening for biased descriptors, requiring corroboration of reputational claims, and centering survivors' accounts and risk indicators, these teams can blunt the harms caused by stigmatizing labels and prioritize protective interventions. Practical reforms to reduce language-based harm. Law enforcement and prosecutors should receive training on gender bias recognition and trauma-informed interviewing to avoid dismissive or sexualized labeling. Agencies should audit reports for recurring gendered descriptors and correct language that delegitimizes survivors, and require corroboration for informant claims that rely on reputational shorthand before those claims shape charging or risk assessments. Informant handling and community intelligence protocols should screen sources for bias and rumor-driven content, treating shorthand as intelligence that needs independent verification and limiting reliance on unnamed or reputation-based reports when safety decisions hinge on their content. Victim services and high-risk teams should empower Be Safe advocates and multidisciplinary teams to flag cases where stigma is undermining protection, and to push for safety interventions irrespective of reputational claims, centering survivor voice and documented risk indicators such as patterns of control, escalation, weapons access, and substance coercion over hearsay. Media and community leaders should avoid repeating demeaning nicknames and adopt neutral, survivor-centered language in public communication, while educating local audiences about how stigma and rumor increase danger and discourage reporting. Measuring progress and accountability. Agencies should conduct regular language audits that review police reports, informant logs, and court filings for gendered or sexualized descriptors and publish anonymized findings. Outcome tracking should examine whether cases where demeaning language appeared experienced poorer outcomes, such as delayed protection orders, lower arrest rates, or higher repeat victimization, and use those findings to reform training and procedures. Community feedback loops should be created so survivors and advocates can report when stigmatizing language affected their case and agencies can respond transparently. Conclusion. Words shape risk. In Buffalo, gendered slurs and stigmatizing shorthand, used by informants, boots on the ground, and community actors, have tangible, harmful effects on high-risk and domestic violence victims. Strengthening high-risk teams, expanding and centering Be Safe advocacy, auditing language in official records, and training frontline actors to recognize and counter gender bias are practical, evidence-aligned steps that reduce harm and save lives. Confronting the everyday language of shame is an essential part of making systems truly protective.